I love you, London!
On this day.
So, good evening, everyone. So tonight I'm going to talk about Marie Antoinette and a particular aspect of her life. And then we're going to have a short extract from one of Sri Mataji's talks where she mentions Marie Antoinette, and then we're going to have meditation. So, yes, tonight I want to talk about Marie Antoinette. She was born in 1755. Her mother was Maria Theresa, the Empress of Austria, powerful character in her own right. She was married to the Dauphin, the future King Louis XVI of France, when she was just 14, and was welcomed in France when she first arrived. But increasingly, she found herself an object of public resentment for what was seen as her extravagant ways, unconventional behavior, and supposedly pro-Austrian sentiments. And we all know about her terrible fate. Executed in 1793 in the course of the French Revolution. But it's somewhat harder to get an idea of her personality, her character. She's often said to have been frivolous and flirtatious. One well-known biography paints her as an ordinary, rather mediocre, rather naive woman who got caught up in events beyond her control. The consensus would seem to be that for all her good points, in her extravagance and willful ignorance of the real economic and political state of affairs in France, she brought her troubles on herself. Edmund Burke had a very different view of her, and he was someone whose opinion I feel is worth taking note of. I want to talk more about Burke and his ideas next time. That'll be in a couple of weeks. But for now, we just need to know that he was a politician. He wrote a famous response to the French Revolution, Reflections on the Revolution in France, it was called. And he published this in 1790. So it's just a year into the revolution and before the reign of terror had really begun. And the most famous or infamous passage in this book of his is the one where he talks about Marie Antoinette. So at the point when he was writing, she was under a kind of house arrest, and 3 years were yet to pass during which the net would be tightened around her. More and more accusations and insults, many of them of a really vicious pornographic nature, would be hurled against her. Her son would be taken away from her and through a process of re-education turned against her. That's the cruelest blow of all. Her husband, the king, of course, and many of her friends would be murdered. And finally, she herself would suffer the same fate, proudly and bravely, or bold and impudent to the last, as one of her enemies put it. So this is what Burke wrote. It is now 16 or 17 years since I saw the Queen of France, then the Dauphiness, at Versailles, and surely never lighted on this orb, which she hardly seemed to touch, a more delightful vision. I saw her just above the horizon, decorating and cheering the elevated sphere she just began to move in, glittering like the morning star, full of life and splendor and joy. Oh, what a revolution. He means what a change in her circumstances. And what a heart must I have to contemplate without emotion that elevation and that fall. As I say, I want to talk more about his ideas next time, but very briefly, what he goes on to say here is that Marie Antoinette's downfall marked a turning point in European manners, in its culture, according to him. In our terms, he's arguing that the French revolutionaries, the intellectuals who were leading it, were moving so far onto the right side with their abstract ideas about human rights and their utopian, futuristic vision of society, that they were breaking away from the left side of feeling and tradition completely. This book of Burke's was immediately successful. It also drew a good deal of criticism. Tom Paine's The Rights of Man was written in response to it, and so on. But even many of the people who agreed with him felt that he had gone well over the top with this praise of Marie Antoinette. One of his friends dismissed this passage as pure foppery, by which I guess he means empty rhetoric with maybe a touch of kitsch about it. Burke wrote back to him saying, "I tell you again that the recollection of the manner in which I saw the Queen of France in the year 1774, and the contrast between that brilliancy, splendor, and beauty with the prostrate homage of a nation to her, compared with the abominable scene of 1789, which I was describing, did draw tears from me and wetted my paper. These tears came again into my eyes almost as often as I looked at the description. They may again. You do not believe this fact, or that these are my real feelings, but that the whole is affected, or as you express it, downright foppery. My friend, I tell you, it is truth, and that it is true and will be true when you are and I are no more, and will exist as long as men with their natural feelings exist." One person who did agree with Burke in his estimation of Marie Antoinette was Horace Walpole. He's an interesting character. He was the son of a former prime minister and a writer. He's probably best known to us as the builder of Strawberry Hill House in London, a charming neo-Gothic mansion. Anyway, he wrote, "I know the tirade on the Queen of France is condemned, and yet I must avow I admire it much. It paints her exactly as she appeared to me the first time I saw her when Dauphiness. She shot through the room like an aerial being, all brightness and grace without seeming to touch the earth." Earlier, in 1775, when Marie Antoinette was 20, he had written to a friend about seeing her at a court ball. "What I have to say I can tell your ladyship in a word, for it was impossible to see anything but the Queen. Hebes and Floras and Helens and Graces are street walkers to her. She is a statue and beauty when standing or sitting, grace itself when she moves, dressed in silver, scattered over with laurier roses, a few diamonds and feathers." So personally, I'm not setting myself up at all as an expert on Marie Antoinette, but this picture of Burke's and Walpole's rings true to me. My feeling is that essentially, not always, but essentially at heart, she was playful rather than frivolous, spontaneous rather than careless, and innocent rather than naive. But really the issue I wanted to raise in talking about Marie Antoinette is that of two contrasting views that revolve around her behavior. These two views, or arguments, are as relevant today as they were in her own time, maybe much more so. One can be called the modern, rational, socially conscious argument. This attitude sees Marie Antoinette, with the attention she paid to beauty and her lavish spending, 300 gowns a year, the renovation of the Petit Trianon, this delightful sort of large summer house that her husband gave her, the creation of an English landscape garden with a rotunda and a sublime belvedere, which she had designed for her as a sort of music room, outdoor music room, absolutely beautiful. The building of an imitation rustic hamlet and so on. They would see this as the perfect example of useless extravagance. Coupled with that comes the accusation that such extravagance was only possible in a highly unequal society. It was totally undemocratic. This, in a way, was the argument Thomas Jefferson was making when he said that if Marie Antoinette had been shut away in a convent, the French Revolution would never have happened. The counter-argument, the one the one that approves of what she was doing when she was commissioning works of art and craft at a time when others were struggling, is harder to make, especially nowadays. It goes something like this. On the one hand, inequality is built into the human condition. It should be tempered, but it cannot be eradicated. Even if you forced everyone to wear identical Chairman Mao costumes and made them live in identical high-rise tower blocks, hardly 5 minutes would pass before arguments broke out as to who was living in the penthouse suites of those tower blocks and who was adding little individual touches to their Chairman Mao suits and so on. And of course, you would have the fundamental inequality between those who were being forced to live like this and those who were doing the forcing. On the other hand, to create objects and monuments of art and beauty, either on a small domestic scale or on a large public scale, is an activity that has a subtle eternal value. It's one of those things that makes life worth living. There's a lovely passage in one of Auden's poems. It goes, "O unicorn among the cedars, to whom no magic charm can lead us, white childhood, moving like a sigh through the green woods unharmed in thy sophisticated innocence, to call thy true love to the dance." I'm not quite sure what he means by that phrase, sophisticated innocence, but it does seem to capture Marie Antoinette's taste nicely. She loved the beautiful neoclassical art of her time, both in its grandest form and in its simpler form. She was criticized for the grandeur, and she was criticized for example, these charming toiles de joue, cotton fabrics printed with rustic scenes, which are still, you can get them today, and she would wear clothes made out of these, and they said, oh, she's wearing her underwear. Her taste was innocent, yet very refined. She was a culturally educated patron. She wasn't a hopeless vulgarian like, say, Ceausescu or Saddam. She brought culture and a new simplicity to France at a time when it was steeped in artificiality. So, I'll give an example of these two arguments about ostentatious inequality and elitist patronage. A while back, we visited Wilton House, which is a beautiful mansion in Wiltshire. We were in the single cube room there, which with its painted ceiling and Inigo Jones fireplace, has long been considered one of the finest rooms of its time in England. It's majestic. And the double cube room next door is even better. Yet the guide was saying, of course, everything you're looking at was simply an exercise in power. It was made to impress visitors with a feeling of awe at how great the owners were, and so on. In other words, according to this guide, it wasn't really about aesthetics at all. It was about politics. There was nothing innocent about it. It was all part of a cunning plan. Such people, as Anthony Daniels puts it, would look at the Taj Mahal and see only the social injustice that produced it. Another example of these two attitudes could, I think, be seen in the contrasting media coverage of two recent events here in the UK, the coronation and, in the same week, the Eurovision Song Contest, which was held up in Liverpool this year. There's nothing more elitist than a king. And the kind of people Burke went on to in that passage, he goes on to refer to them as sophistas, economists, and calculators, were arguing that the money spent on the coronation would have been far better spent on the NHS or on filling in potholes, of which there are many. And that's an argument one could legitimately make. To them, all that stuff about a man having a sparkly hat put on his head in a church was as irrational as it was out of date and symbolic of inequality, and it has no place in the contemporary world. If they have an ideal of a good leader or figurehead, it would be someone very far removed from Marie Antoinette or Charles. It would be someone, say, like that Uruguayan leader, Jose Mujica, who made a point of living like a poor man in a ramshackle farmhouse, even when he was president. Yes, they would probably say there should be some public art and public entertainments, but these should be commissioned democratically, which in practice means by state-appointed committees. It was interesting to see how the BBC was distinctly ambivalent about the coronation, providing respectful coverage, yes, but at the same time toying with the idea of its being an outdated symbol of inequality and offering advice on its website as to how to go about avoiding the whole business altogether. Whereas when it came to the Eurovision Song Contest later that same week, it had no such reservations. This was wholly good because it exactly matched the present-day cultural establishment's idea of a democratic kind of art. It's what they imagine ordinary people want, need, and expect from art. It has no pretensions to being high art. It doesn't require any exertion of the attention on the part of its audience, as something more subtle would. It's simply chucked straight at them. Nor can it be accused of being elitist, although, of course, someone has to win, and someone else, usually us, gets nul point. So apart from the obvious political aspect to the imprisonment and execution of Marie Antoinette, was there also an iconoclastic, anti-artistic, anti-aesthetic element in what was done to her? I would say yes, definitely, of course. We may not think of beauty as having enemies, but it does, very much so, and always has done. Enemies both on the left side and on the right side. A destructive attitude towards art has been evident at various times in history. Iconoclasm during the Reformation, and especially during the Cultural Revolution in China. The attack from the left side is mostly an emotional one. It consists of a resentment towards the kind of beauty which it associates with an exploitative system. Besides, what is gross always wants to overpower what is subtle. This resentment isn't just a beautiful art. We see it directed as beautiful girls as well. They may seem to have every advantage because of their looks, but it isn't necessarily so, because they have to contend with jealousy. By beauty here, I mean much more than mere prettiness. I mean something like the charisma of innocence. So something auspicious. Sri Mataji commented on the kind of jealousy which such beauty can arouse. And although in the portraits of Marie Antoinette, which vary greatly in quality, she doesn't appear to have been beautiful by our standards, certainly pretty in some of them, while not pretty at all in others. I think she must have had a beautiful sparkle about her, which prompted a personal animosity on the part of her enemies. They didn't just dislike her because of what she stood for. They disliked her for herself as well, intensely, cheering with delight when her head was cut off. From the right side, the attack on beauty is more an intellectual one. It prioritizes ideology over aesthetics. It considers beauty elitist because, after all, beauty is a rare thing, while the not beautiful is everywhere. Like that guide at Wilton House who could only see an expression of power when she looked around her, this right-sidedness can't see beauty and senses that it's unable to experience something living and therefore is envious of it and wants to spoil it. So, to quote Jamel, Sri Mataji often used our outings around London to give us a vibratory awareness of art and aesthetics. She would know all the different types of auspicious raw materials and accessories used for making furniture, curtains, bedspreads, carpets, chandeliers, etc., that were expected to be used in a home to spread the maximum of divine vibrations. She would often reiterate how important it was for us to appreciate the aesthetics of matter. She often said that, as you know, that matter has only one power or quality, that it can express love. but she also said how its aesthetics are very important. The implication being that true beauty and pure love are very close. Marie Antoinette, a gifted musician herself, grew up in the age of Mozart, whom she met when they were both children at the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna. There's an apocryphal story that he told her he would marry her one day. They were both 8 at the time. He died in 1791 at the age of 35. She was only 37 when she was executed 2 years later. According to the Blake scholar Northrop Frye, that age of Watteau and Mozart came perhaps as near as any other in history to realizing Blake's ideal of art as the urbanity of the city of light in a world of fully conscious innocence. I'm not sure he's altogether right, because Blake loved the Gothic, but it's a point of view with which I wouldn't disagree myself. But then came the age of Goya and Beethoven, of a turbulent romanticism. The art historian Arnold Hauser put it like this when he wrote, "The combination of carefree light-heartedness with the most profound seriousness, of playful exuberance with the highest, purest ethos transfiguring the whole of life, which was still present in Mozart, breaks up. From now on, everything serious and sublime takes on a gloomy and careworn look. It is sufficient to compare the serene, clear, and calm humanity of Mozart, its freedom from all turbid emotionalism, with the violence of romantic music, to realize what had been lost with the 18th century, and we can say also with the age of Marie Antoinette." As for that purple passage of Burke's about her in his Reflections, his book was quickly translated into French, and it's said that she was shown it at some point during her imprisonment. As soon as she began reading it, she burst into floods of tears and had to compose herself before she could finish it. But it must have been comforting to know that somewhere she was still cherished. Okay, so we'll have the brief extract of a talk in Paris by Schumann.
Now I'm told they are celebrating the French Revolution that took place. If you ask me, there was no need to have a revolution of that kind to kill Marie Antoinette. It was not necessary. If they had killed or not killed, it would have been all right. But they had to kill her. Why? Because according to them, she spent a lot of money in Versailles and created some beautiful furniture. Today only they are showing that furniture only. What else there to show in this France? As soon as you come, they say, "Have you seen her palace?" I said, "Really?" First time when I came to France, this was the first question. You must go and see. It's impossible. You cannot get such beautiful things anywhere created. It's an impossible situation. I said, "Impossible?" "Yes, because you cannot make such nice things." She made such nice, beautiful things. She was not going to carry it with her. Now, when you murdered her, then you ask me to go and see those beautiful things. We have to learn from history that it was stupid to kill her. What was the need to kill her? When you have taken over the government, all right, stop at that point. And then you start governing. With that revolution, you think world has improved for us? Anywhere in the world, do you think things have improved? Also, a revolution should have been to change the government, all right. But to go to that limit was not necessary. So the second conditioning that comes to us, that we cross all limits of humanity when we take revenge. They would not have been satisfied that she was still living. Oh God, we have to kill her. Of course, I don't say that somebody who has done any harm to the country, to the nation, should be allowed to go on like that. But how far you go with that is to be seen. So the wisdom of Sahaja Yoga is in understanding the limitations up to which you can go to express your anger, to express your revenge, so-called, on anyone whatsoever. But the best thing would be to leave it to the divine power, because everything is done by divine power. We all exist inside the divine power. We cannot think of anything else of that kind. I cannot give you an analogy how divine power works. For example, if there were no rays of the sun coming out of the sun, staying inside the sun, and all things working out, then we would have said it's something like divine power. Nothing is outside that. Everything is inside. And this divine power is the power of compassion and love, which does everything. But when we take up the responsibility, and when we decide we have to do something, and that we are something, and try to go against that divine power, we become stupid people, as we have seen. So to leave it in the hands of divine power and to be just an instrument of that divine power is the way Sahaja Yogi has to be. Because the compassion, the love of divine power is so great that it is wisdom, complete wisdom. A person who has no compassion cannot be wise. He could be worldly wise, but he could not be really wise.
Okay, so we'll have a meditation now. I'll just say a few words because here at home we have someone brand new, so I'll do a little explanation. So yes, if you sit around facing, so, and with the hands comfortably, that's right. So we're going to put our attention to this desire within us that we should experience something of this compassion and this love, that it should become a reality to us. So this energy, Kundalini energy, which is the pure mother or the Holy Spirit, as it's called, within us, we invite her to awaken and rise up. The Sushumna Nadi, that's within the spinal column. So there's nothing for us to do except to put ourselves in that position where we're sincerely asking for something. So the main stumbling block is always at the Agya level, that's in the head. And on the one side, we have the ego, which always wants to do something, to be responsible, to take the burden of the world upon itself. So we have to just say, not this ego. I am not my ego, or I am not that ego. I am the spirit. I am the spirit. I am the pure spirit. And then on the other side, the head is the conditioning, all the superego, the past, the subconscious, all that within us. So there we have to say, I am not this conditioning. I am not at all anything that would impress itself upon my being through the mind. I am the spirit, the pure spirit. And then we just have to be silent. And then, finally, Kundalini should, or may have already, pierced the fontanelle bone at the top of the head. So this is the moment of yoga where inwardly our awareness is connected with the spirit, what we call the spirit or the true self, which is something quite mysterious, very unlike any conception that we have of the usual self, the ego and the conditioning, either one or both combined. Spirit is something very much beyond, not easy to pin down at all. So if we just relax, and if we feel it, that's good. If we don't feel it, just be patient and just wait another minute or two. So if the thoughts are still coming, then we can say, just as if we're standing back from them a little, watching them come and go, not identifying them. Not this, not this, not this. But to be relaxed is the best thing, because it's effortless. Not to feel bad about ourselves at all. Okay, so Priti, if you'd like to play some music now, this is from Brighton, many years ago. I was there, beautiful concert.
week ago, last Sunday, I had been to a concert of Indian classical music in London, and there I had the privilege to meet Her Holiness, and she commanded me to play for her.
Don't buy another toothbrush until you see what this one can do for you. Using it only takes 30 seconds for a professional.
Ciao. It means hello and goodbye. Maybe this is because in Italy we live in the moment.
So that's it for this Friday's meditation. Thank you all for joining, and in a couple of weeks there'll be a sort of follow-up to the talk about Marie Antoinette, where I'll be talking about Burke and his ideas and their value to us, some of them. Okay, thank you very much. Jai Shri Mataji.